Okay, folks, it's time to go over the Rippazine. That's right, it's the Rippaverse's answer to Wizard World, Hero Magazine, all of those fan magazines that they used to put out. I never really got much into those. I think Wizard World only interested me in that they would have these polls that was like, who's your favorite inker this month, and what's your favorite storyline this month, and then they'd be like, what was your favorite shocking moment, and then they would spoil things from various comics. It used to piss me off, but I would still go back and read those things. Then I'd be like, oh, why did I read that? Now I know that now. Yeah, I never got into the whole comic book magazine thing. Even though, once in a while there would be something interesting, like I know in Previews magazine I would get that now and then because they'd feature a comic or something in there. Like Plasm Number Zero from Defiant was originally released as a comic inside of Previews magazine, and that was the only way you could get the comic in non-trading card form. Uh, I swear, I mean, they got their funding. Defiant Comics was the company that Jim Shooter founded after he was kicked out of Valiant, and apparently the River Group was a trading card company that funded them, and they said, okay, well, we'll fund your comic book company, but you got to release the first couple of issues as trading cards, and it was just the worst idea ever. And damn it if I didn't wind up buying some of those too. I actually do have still my Plasm Number Zero binder and my Dark Dominion Number Zero binder with the full set of cards and such. Um, but man, those were hard things to put together. I don't even know if I put those together myself. I think I went and bought collections, and that's how I made mine. I think that's how that worked. Anyway, okay, so the Rippazine. This was a adjunct onto the Yaira #1 campaign, and you could get one of two versions. I myself got the $20 version. I got the collector's edition because it features the first cover appearance of Salvage PI. The other cover is what you'll see here on the table of contents page, where you've got Brian Solari and Isom and Yaira all featured there. I really didn't care for this cover. This was the $7 version that you would get, or at least the cover image you would get on the $7 version if you just decided to get the regular kind. I preferred the salvage version, so I decided I was going to pony up for it. Now, if you looked at this table of contents carefully, one of the things you're going to notice is that these numbers are not in order. That's right. This is a table of contents that sucks at telling you where things are, because seriously, every magazine that I have ever read has the table of contents showing you everything in the page number order. I mean, you would see Artist's Corner with Alpha Core and Igor, and it would be the top entry there, and then Salvage would come after that, and then what would come next? You would have the interviews with Chuck Dixon, Mike Barron, and Dean Cain. I mean, I was half tempted just to rearrange this on the page, but then, of course, because the art behind it would get all chopped up, I realized there was no point in doing that. But yeah, I was really upset when I first saw this, because I'm looking at this like, this is not useful to me in any way, shape, or form. What idiot designed this? Who decided they were going to innovate on a table of contents? Your table of contents has one job, and that's tell the reader where the articles are in the book. Ah, the very idea that somebody thought they could improve upon the whole table of contents concept is just absolutely insane. But I have a feeling there actually was a little bit of method to the madness going on here, because if at first I looked and I said, well, the topical portions are not even in alphabetical order. They don't seem to be thematically arranged. I don't understand why they put things together in this way. And then I started to realize that there was a little bit of logic behind it. For example, if you look at all of these items, these are all told from the perspective of, you are in the Rippaverse and you are in Florispark, and these are the kinds of things that you would see happening around you if you were part of the Rippaverse. And then the next portion is interviews with live human beings. And so there's a segment of the table of contents just for that. And last comes the Rippaverse previews. So there is a little bit of logic to how the table of contents is put together, but it's still one of the dumbest ideas I've ever seen. You know what a table of contents is for, what it's supposed to be used for. Don't jack with what works for 99.999% of the population. I swear to God, if you have been going through life thinking that you needed to thematically rearrange table of contents and everybody would appreciate you for it, you are so wrong. Just let the table of contents be the table of contents. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and go through the table of contents, and I'll comment on each of the items contained within the RIPPAZINE. So we start off, not in page order, but we start off in the table of contents with the feature comic, Salvage PI, and that is a 13-page comic, part 1 of a story, unfortunately. Yes, there will be a part 2. You're not getting the full meal deal in here, which I think is absolutely regrettable. Then you have this section called the Florispark Gazette, and this is 99% useless, I would say, especially if you've read everything that the Rippaverse has to offer. If you have read ISOM number 1 and 2, and Alpha Core and Yaira number 1, and if you're planning on getting GOODYNG number 1, you don't need anything that's in here. And practically nothing in here is any kind of help to you anyway. Bloodroot's horoscope, literally, it's just a horoscope page, or 2 pages of horoscopes. It's a waste of 2 pages. Lillian's hot tea is probably the most useful out of the whole mess, and that's Lillian Renashi giving like little gossipy dishes on what's going on in the various comics. It's kind of like giving you teasers to get you interested in the books. Michael's Gentleman's Club is just gross. It's almost like Michael Copper is thought to be like the Andrew Tate guy of the Rippaverse, and I couldn't even read that section because I don't even want to know what this guy considers dating advice, which is what he's dispensing in there. And by the way, look at how Michael Copper is actually portrayed in the RIPPAZINE. Do you remember this guy from any comics? Because I don't. This is not the Michael Copper I remember from anywhere. If you look at Alpha Core, for example, which really gives what I would think is the definitive Michael and Lillian, since they're integral parts of the book, this guy is not built, he's not muscular, and he's not really that attractive. So you've got like Channing Tatum on the left over here, and then you've got I don't know what would be a good actor to compare him to. I don't know. There's nobody I can think of right now. But he's just kind of slim and average looking. And seriously, who's got the style guide for Michael Copper? And what is it? Especially since in ISOM number 1, he looks like this. It's almost like nobody knew from one person to the next how to draw Michael Copper. And either that or the guy's a shapeshifter, and that's one of his powers. Heck if I know. So, getting back to the Gazette, Harriet's Kitchen, it's literally a recipe thing. Merc Mixology, it's a recipe for a drink. Totally useless. Character spotlight on Altona Daniels, that's Isom's sister, and she is the Chief Technology Officer at Projexis Corp, which employs both her and Yaira in her secret identity. And the only like useful thing that I learned about her was that she's got an IQ of 140, but okay, yeah, big whoop. Then we get into the real world articles. Artist's Corner with Alpha Core and Igor Texiera. I don't know why they don't put his last name in here. They put all the celebrity last names in the interviews. Same thing with Marcos Rios at the Meet the Staff thing toward the end of the book. Uh, I don't understand why they don't just put the last names right in this table of contents. It's kind of silly. But the Artist's Corner entry with Alpha Core by Igor Texiera, it's actually really quite packed with information on how to draw and color a comic. So anybody who's wanting to know things about how the sausage is made, that's a great place to go. The interviews with Chuck Dixon and Mike Barron and Dean Cain, they were all fairly interesting, and I mean, it's nice to see that kind of material. This is really the meatier section of the book, and then you've got, of course, concept artist Marcos Rios at the end. That's where you're going to get the majority of value from the book is going to be from the real life interviews with people and people giving you tips on what to do, what not to do. So that is probably the main draw. If you don't think that's worth your $7, then you may as well just skip the entire book. And then, of course, you've got the Rippaverse previews at the end. And while the Rippaverse previews are given in the order in which the books came out, I was a little bit surprised that they previewed both ISOM number 1 and ISOM number 2 in the same issue of the Rippazine. You know, for one thing, they don't have that many issues to preview, so I thought they'd save ISOM number 2 for the next issue of Rippazine, but I guess they just didn't have anything else of value to fill any pages with. But I think they're going to come up short of previews in their next Rippazine at this rate. And I wonder how often the Rippazine is supposed to come out, because I'm looking at this in terms of value. And I know there is a $5 monthly tier for the membership on the Rippaverse site. And one of the perks of signing up is that you get the latest copy of the Rippazine. Now, that would be great. It would definitely be a net benefit if you could pay $5 a month for a membership and then get the next issue of the Rippazine every month, because it would come out 12 times a year. But I suspect this is only going to come out maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And at that point, there's no sense in getting the membership to sign up for that. I'd rather just have my pick of the covers and pay for it independently. So let's get into the story of Salvage PI, which for some reason is referred to here in the table of contents as the Salvage. I don't know why. I do remember Eric came out with a video saying, "Meet the Salvage," and he liked to call him the Salvage, even though that would mean that there were more PIs than one called Salvage, and you had to specify which one you were actually talking about. Makes no sense, but that's par for the course when you're dealing with the Rippaverse. So, this is the story is called Salvage PI on the cover, and it's also called Salvage PI on the page where the story starts in the interior. So why it's called the Salvage on the table of contents, again, that's as much of a guess as why the table of contents is in the order it's in. But let's take a look at the title page of Salvage PI. You've got Eric July as writer. This is the first thing he's written since ISOM number 2. Bart Sears is the artist, and Bart Sears has a long and storied history in comics. And damn, if I can, if I'm remembering where I remember him from first, most likely Justice League Europe. Justice League Europe or Justice League No, not International, because that was somebody else. Justice League Europe, where I think he had his rise to prominence, and then he hopped over to Valiant for a stint on Exo Man of War, and he also landed in CrossGen, which was really one of my favorite companies there. He and Andy Smith, who we often partnered with, uh, were instrumental in bringing the first to life. And he also had a book of another style. He did the book of The Path, which dealt with rogue samurai in a Japan-like world. So, yeah, Bart Sears has been around for quite a bit, and it's going to surprise you when you see some of the art that you get in here that just doesn't make much sense, and thought he would know better. So, looking at the blurb that I assume Eric July wrote for Salvage PI, it kind of does double duty as both a character briefing and a story briefing. So let's go through it. The affluent city of Florespark, Texas is not bereft of crime, and the threat of criminals possessing acceptabilities is a very real one. But not all crimes are caused by giant walking, talking barbecues or denizens of the underworld. And for cases that don't call for flying super cops or superpowered vigilantes to be solved, there's one man whom private citizens can go to who always has his ear to the streets. Salvage PI. A marked increase in the theft of luxury goods smells like corporate sabotage, and Salvage sounds like just the man for the job. But has this private investigator gotten in over his head? A lot of text there. Not all of it necessary. Let's start going through it. First, I always prefer to to bold Florespark, Texas, because it's a city that people are not going to be familiar with if you're coming to the Rippaverse cold. Then I would basically rewrite this entire section, and the reason being is because he is seeming to say that this is not a story that is going to involve acceptabilities, whether on the part of the protagonist or on the part of the antagonists. And that is fundamentally not true. If you look at the story, you're going to encounter a guy who has super strong legs and can do serious damage with them. And moreover, and you're going to find this pretty shocking, I know I did, it turns out Salvage himself has a superpower. He has the power of super hearing. And I believe that is why you see the word ear referenced, who always has his ear to the streets. His super hearing comes in handy. So this actually is a tale involving people with superpowers, and since it is, it's not really doesn't make much sense to write your blurb introducing the book in terms of not experiencing those powers. So I would write it as something like this instead. Most crimes in the affluent city of Florespark, Texas are handled by the police, superpowered or not. However, not all of Florespark's citizens welcome the prying eyes of law enforcement. For cases requiring discretion, a private investigator can help. If you need a man with keen eyes and exceptionally keen ears, pun intended, call on Salvage PI. And then we've got the story briefing portion, and honestly, I don't like anything about this either. Largely because it reveals a little too much about the story to come. I would just get rid of it altogether. But if you felt like you absolutely had to have a story blurb, the first thing I would do, bar none, is separate it from the character blurb. But I would also rewrite it in the following way. When repeated thefts threaten to bankrupt a high-end luxury goods company, its desperate COO turns to Salvage for help. And that's a much less informative but perfectly adequate introduction to the story, because you don't really want to when you're dealing with something that's only going to be 13 pages long, do you really want to give the reader that much information? I don't think so. Now let's get into the story itself, and we open up with a truck driving down the road and a car following a bit far behind. And we have this caption that says, "Please let me formally introduce myself." But there's a problem with this caption, and the problem is that it crosses the border between panels into the second panel. And what that does is it distracts the reader into wanting to move his eyes over into the second panel already without having appreciated what's going on in the first panel. You really need to keep this first caption within the first panel so that the reader will look down the page, see all that there is to see, and then come back up to the top and move to the second panel. So please let me formally introduce myself. You can just call me Salvage. How is that a formal introduction? Okay, a formal introduction would involve your full name, your title, maybe what you do, and the reason why you're there, what your expectations are. This, "You can just call me Salvage," is the most informal introduction you can offer. So, can I please, it's bad enough I already saw the problem with the first caption box and where it's positioned. But now the language just doesn't make any sense either. And I would really love it if with Gooding the Polymath you worked extra hard to make the first page of that book flawless. I am getting so tired of opening up a Rippaverse story to the first page and immediately seeing things wrong. Give me a break already, alright? I want Gooding the Polymath to do well, but to do well and to get my recommendation, you're going to need to have some real editorial control on it. And God, just seeing this in the Rippazine makes me think that there's no hope for a Rippaverse when it comes to editorial control. Moreover, you can just call me Salvage. Who's talking? Because for all we know, it's this guy. He's the only guy we've seen so far. And you might be saying, now, Mike, come on. This is not a fair objection. You've already read the blurb. You've already seen Salvage on the cover. You know that this fat white guy is not Salvage, this double-chinned white trucker. He's obviously not a suave black man. Well, first of all, I would say, how do you know? Because, for all we know, this is a story about a fat white trucker who got into a trucking accident, and his brain was transplanted into the body of a suave black man who decided to become a private investigator. I don't freaking know anything about Salvage PI, other than his name is Salvage and he's a PI. I don't know where he came from. I don't know how he got there. I don't know if that's, a real body or a robot body. Anything is possible. So don't tell me that, the blurb is supposed to communicate anything to me, or even that this cover is supposed to communicate anything to me, especially when you could have gotten the regular version, which didn't have the Salvage PI cover. But even then, even if we were dealing with the Salvage PI cover, there's the fact that covers aren't really part of the comic. Because if you ever look at the comic book, at a comic book cover, and then you compare it against the contents of the book, very, very often there is not a one-to-one match between the exterior and the interior. One of my favorite examples of this is Superman World of New Krypton #4, where it shows Green Lantern Hal Jordan and Clark Kent in, Kal-El, in his Kryptonian garb, coming to blows for some reason. Now, this scene is nowhere in the book. They do not actually get into a knockdown, drag-out fight, but they do have a conflict, and this fight on the cover serves as the metaphor for their conflict. It's an image representing the conflict between them that will be in the book. But there's no actual fight, which means that you can never rely upon a cover to tell you what's actually going to go on in the book. It may kind of give you a vague idea of it, but it won't be a one-to-one correspondence. So it doesn't make any sense to say, well, you saw the cover, Mike. The cover doesn't tell you much of anything. However, there have been comics down through the years where the covers actually served as comic book pages. Now, I only know of 3 examples of this myself. You might be able to tell me more. If you know of another one, by all means, put it in the comments. I'd be curious to see it. One of those is Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen. If you look at the cover of Watchmen #1, you've got a button, a smiley face button with a drop of blood on it, and it's surrounded by blood that is washing away or kind of flowing around it. And then if you look at the first page, it starts by pulling out on that picture that's on the cover so that you can see the button in its entirety and then the blood all around it. So you actually have the cover as the first portion of the book. And the same thing holds true for the sequel to Watchmen, Doomsday Clock, written by Jeff Johns and drawn by Gary Frank. And here, there's actually the same trick played in reverse. You've got this crowd. It's got the end is here sign, and then a close-up is made on the end is here. Now, there's one other comic that I know has this convention as well, and it'll be interesting to see if you can guess what that is. Okay, time's up. That comic actually is one of the new 52 titles that came out of Flashpoint from DC. It's Action Comics by Grant Morrison and Rags Morales. It's harder to see, though. You don't immediately pick up on it. But if you look at the cover, you see Superman in his very, very earliest costume, leaping through the streets, being fired upon by the police. And then when you go to the first page of the book, it opens at the top of a hotel where there is all of this rich people gathering going on. And Superman jumps to the top of the hotel and confronts the rich people there. And then outside the hotel, you see the police who were chasing Superman pulling up at the front door. And then they run inside, and you get this little snippet of dialogue that says, "How did I wind up chasing something that shouldn't exist?" And that also clues you into the fact that, hey, that cover is actually part of the story. And I think that's maintained at least 6 issues into Action Comics. I don't know if it goes any farther than that, because Grant Morrison lasted about 12 issues on Action Comics. But I do know that the first 6 issues do follow this pattern, where the first page is actually the first page of this, where the cover is actually the first page of the story. So getting back to this, all that is to say that for all I know, this double-chinned white trucker is Salvage. And he keeps his ear to the streets. And then all of a sudden, he gets hit from behind, or maybe something happens in front of him that causes the truck to shift forward. Now, if you're being chased by a car and you're driving a semi-truck, are they actually going to be able to hit your truck from behind and cause any kind of noticeable movement that's going to jar your coffee loose? I'm not entirely sure that's the case, but that's what happens here, it seems. And then the guy looks up, and oh my gosh, there is a ninja on the front of the truck. And then the captioning continues, "I can almost guarantee you results, but I am a specialist." I can almost guarantee you results? I mean, is that the way you really want to sell yourself? Is that marketing? Is that real marketing strategy to say I can almost guarantee you results? Likewise, but I am a specialist. Oh, well, just limit yourself while you're at it. I mean, you're almost guaranteeing me results, and then you're telling me you only specialize in certain things. So he kicks the window in, and then we have this scene where the guy drags the wheel over, and there's a big crash. Now, if there's theft involved, you come to the right place. Okay, now I'm starting to wonder if the ninja is Salvage. because why not? You know, he's obviously going to steal something from the truck. Yeah, maybe I think, honestly, all of the captions up to this point can be applied just as easily to the ninja. And it just shows some of that ambiguity, that we saw back in Yaira #1, where there were so many panels where you could have double and, in this case, even triple meanings. Oh, by the way, did you notice that he yanks the wheel? The startled driver yanks the wheel over to the left, and then he crashes into a telephone pole and gets ejected through the cab. But where were the telephone poles? Telephone poles were on the right of the truck. This is a expanded scene that I stretched out. If you look up in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that on the other side of the street, there's no telephone poles. So he yanked the wheel over to the left and somehow crashed on the right. That's the Rippaverse for you. Oh, and by the way, let's take a look at the front of that cab for a second, because when I'm looking at the front of the cab, it looks like a flat-faced cab to me. It looks like one of those cab-over engine types that they use more often these days in Europe than they do in America. But they used to use them in America because Optimus Prime was actually one of those cabs. And if you look at the first page, you'll see that the cab looks flat-faced. I mean, it looks like one of these. This is what this particular truck looks like. So what did the ninja land on? Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to let you sit and think about that for a minute. What exactly did the ninja land on that he was able to, find the leverage to kick the window in and all that good stuff? So when the truck's crashed and now they're going to plunder he's going to plunder the truck. He goes around to the back. He kicks the truck open, and his henchmen come around and they look in the truck and they see, we don't know. We don't know because we're never shown. We just cut to another scene. And in this scene, we have a guy. It's some apartment building, and within the building on the top floor, we see a guy saying, "Mr. Salvage, I do have one question for you." And now I'm realizing, oh, okay. Well, then Salvage wasn't the truck driver. Salvage was not the ninja. Salvage is this guy sitting right here. So the whole thing, the whole caption was Salvage's dialogue to this guy who's sitting in the chair. And what that means is that we again have a demonstration of how the Rippaverse staff doesn't have the slightest clue how to do comics. Because it is a common convention within comics that if you have captions that are a record of dialogue that is taking place somewhere else other than the scene on the page, you put quote marks in front of all of the dialogue to show the reader that this is dialogue that is taking place off page. They don't even know the basics over there. So now we've got this sequence of panels in which Eric July is trying to describe to us through this dialogue between Salvage and his client the concept of a lethal force certified private investigator as opposed to a regular private investigator. And it's just a pile of BS. Let's start from the beginning. What is it with this license to kill business? That's a wrong interpretation. Nobody has a license to kill, but Florispark issues a special license to qualified private investigators. So, as long as I'm justified and on contract, I'm permitted to use lethal force. It took several years to obtain such an honor. Most don't bother to go through the rigorous training. I believe there are 3 of us, and our permits are only recognized within the city-state. Okay, so Here we have Eric July trying to establish this concept of lethal force certification that is something different from a license to kill. Now, if you're not familiar with the term license to kill, that's a term from the James Bond movies in which all of the 00 agents, like himself, he's 007, have the authority to initiate lethal force to accomplish their objectives. So let's say that you are a 00 agent and you need to get inside a building, and the only way to get inside the building is to kill the security guard and take his key. You're allowed to do that because you have a license to kill. Now, there aren't that many agents who have a license to kill. There's usually only about like 9 at any given time. But those agents have the license to kill in the line of duty. You know, they're not just allowed to kill for any reason, no, any way, shape, or form. Somebody cuts you off in track, that no, you don't have a license to kill that person. But if it is in the pursuit of your mission, then you do have the ability to use lethal force as you need, even if it means, you know, you're going to be a sniper or something, or you have to assassinate somebody, you know, something like that. Now, what Eric July wants us to think is that license to kill is the wrong interpretation for what he's saying, but his definition of lethal force certification is as long as I'm justified, that is, he actually has legit reason, and on contract, which means in the line of duty, I'm permitted to use lethal force. Well, what the hell difference is that from this? I mean, the only difference that I see is perhaps the use of the word use lethal force versus initiate lethal force. But if use means initiate, then I don't see how what he's got differs in any way from a license to kill. And if use doesn't include initiate, then I don't see how what he's got differs in any way than what a police officer or even a citizen who has a civilian who has a concealed carry license would have, which is the right to use your gun to protect your own life or the life of someone else. So I don't see the problem. I don't see the problem with interpreting this as a license to kill. Or he could just say, no, I've got the same training and authority that a police officer or a civilian with a concealed carry license has. There should be no difference between the two either way. Moreover, he says it took several years to obtain such an honor. Most don't bother to go through the rigorous training, so it's a voluntary program that he would have to sign up for. And he says there's only 3 lethal force certified private investigators in the entire state, or city-state as he calls it. Do you realize what it is he's asking you to believe? He's asking you to believe that there is a voluntary and rigorous lethal force certification program run by the government that only 3 people in the last however many years have passed. No. This is too much BS to swallow. I'm sorry. Let me give you some fun facts about private investigators. Private investigator fun facts. The estimated number of private investigators in the entire United States is 5,000. Now, for some reason, about 2,400 of those are located in the state of Texas. Now, going by population, Texas has a population of about 31 million people, and its largest city, Houston, which we're going to assume Flores Park is equal to, has about 2.3 million people. So that's about, if you take that and get the percentage of PIs based on population, that means there's about 180 PIs in the city of Flores Park. And you're going to tell me that 1.7% of those PIs took and successfully passed a years-long government program that allowed them to be lethal force certified. Let's put this in terms of a different profession, shall we? Let's say we're talking about hairdressers. Let's say that there's 5,000 hairdressers in the United States, and 2,400 of them are in Texas. You've got 180 hairdressers in the city of Flores Park, and 1.7% of those are chainsaw certified, where they can actually cut your hair and style your hair with a chainsaw. But the other 98.3% of hairdressers do just fine with scissors and all the other hairdressing tools. You know what that's going to tell the government? It's going to tell the government that you don't need chainsaw certification to be a hairdresser. And in the same way, it's going to tell the government that you don't need lethal force certification to be a private investigator. This program is not going to exist. It's just, it's not a realistic idea in any way, shape, or form. Moreover, look at the use of the term city-state. This is the first time I've seen Fluorospark referred to as a city-state. And that just tells you how crappy Eric July's world building in the Rippaverse has been so far. I mean, think about it. You've got 4 books, 4 full-length books out from Rippaverse already. You got ISOM number 1, ISOM number 2, Alpha Core number 1, and Yaira number 1. And none of them tell you what the basic governmental structure of the state of Texas is now that it has seceded from the Union. We don't know how Fluorospark relates to the government of Texas. Now that Texas has seceded from the Union, Fluorospark apparently has some sort of city-state status, but what does that mean? Yeah, and what are gun laws in Texas like in this new free state of Texas? We don't know any of this, and that is why the vagueness into which we have been thrust by Eric July's crappy world building prevents us from having any sort of ability to get our bearings about why Salvage would even need this kind of certification. What do you use the lethal force certification for? And how does it differ from the basic gun laws in Texas? Unless you can tell me that, I don't know what any of this nonsense is supposed to mean. And we had a whole blank page in ISOM number 1 at the very start of the book, where the governor, who is talking on the TV in page 2, could have been explaining these things in terms of the governor's, having been just inaugurated, or it's only 6 months into his term. Maybe this is the anniversary of Texas's independence or something, and you could explain, kind of what's going on, how things work now in Fluorospark and in Texas. All of that opportunity wasted. It's just, there's been no real world building to speak of, and it's coming back to bite him something fierce. So after the client leaves, we get our first look at Salvage, and I see something missing. I don't see any stripes on his pants or on his, I guess that's waistcoat. What happened? Where is it? Where are they? I mean, half of the draw of this character is the fact that he looks like a circus reject. Come on. If you're going to show us the character on the cover the way that he is there, why would you not show us that character in the same outfit? It doesn't make any sense. He's a thrift shop reject. Come on, make him a thrift shop reject. Okay, so now, this is important to remember, he's looking over his files, and this file is of William Scotcher, Chief Operations Officer of Britford Trucking. Obviously, he means this guy, who's there on the screen. They are being targeted. Tens of millions of dollars worth of goods have been intercepted. So now he's doing his sleuthing, he's doing his detective thought. So who has the most to gain? A competitor. Very few companies are trusted with such luxury goods. It just so happens that Fluorospark Logistics had to downsize a few years ago. First time ever. A few years ago? What dots are you connecting? I mean, you've got a series of robberies that are taking place in the here and now, and your best connection to anything is a downsizing that took place a few years ago? You know, what changed so that this downsized company is now suddenly embarking on a spree of robberies? He's connecting dots that are so far removed in time that it makes no sense for him to connect them. But in any case, why don't we go pay them a visit? So now he's going to pay a visit to the corporation that he thinks is responsible for the thefts because they had a downsizing a few years ago. So he goes there and he talks to this employee, says, "Got a minute?" And the employee said, "Hold up a second. I thought that was this guy. William Scotcher, Chief Operations Officer of Britford Trucking. What is he doing at the other place?" And then I realize, oh, this is another one of those cases where the text on the screen doesn't match what's on the screen. The text in the panel does not match to what's in the panel. William Scotcher is actually the client who just left. But God forbid, we should actually sync up our panels with our text so that the panels are described by the text. God forbid, we should do the simplest kind of synchronization to get these things to make sense. I'm just shaking my head in disgust. Now, I've already told you most of anything else you need to know. Salvage demonstrates that he has superpowers because he's able to hear a conversation that happens like 2 floors away while he's in an elevator. These guys are down in the parking garage. He's on the 2nd floor, and he can actually hear their conversation. So, obviously, he's got some kind of super hearing. He also has the ability to take his hat when he's not using his gun and just shooting that. He can also take his hat and use it as a frisbee-type device, kind of like Captain America's shield, that, will just knock a person out if it hits them. So I guess he's got that hat weighted pretty good. He also has some measure of athletic ability because when he almost runs into somebody, he does a backflip. he does a backflip somersault or something while holding a gun, no doubt. And then he asks, "Who the hell?" And it's the ninja with the super strong legs. So Legs McNinja confronts Salvage PI, and at this point we are not even given the benefit of a reach around and being told that it's to be continued, or, follow the exploits of Salvage in the next Rippazine, or some other kind of blurb like that. We're just held in place and dropped like Rob Liefeld dropped us in Youngblood #1. Yeah, this was kind of a mess. It was not a very entertaining story, and it really kind of depressed me when I realized it was going to have a part 2, because now I know what's going to be in the next Rippazine, and that is definitely not going to be worth my money. I hope, beyond hope, that the collector's edition cover is not something I'm going to want, because I would much rather pay $7 for the incoming piece of crap whenever it finally arrives, as opposed to $20 for a collector's edition. Yeah, this Rippazine, I mean, as much as I kind of admire the idea that Eric July has had about wanting to draw in more people through this $7 book that gives you all of these previews and all of the, just a taste of what everyone is working on, the interviews, all that kind of stuff. As much as I know he thought it was going to be a value add for the company, I just don't see it. I really don't. I think even this Salvage PI story would probably have been much better utilized in maybe some sort of Rippaverse anthology book, where he had published, 3 or 4 stories that, he and others wanted to publish and just make that, something to look forward to. Like every year they'll put forward an anthology book of stories that cover various characters. So yeah, I mean, I can't really recommend the Rippazine. I especially can't recommend it to anybody who's already read all of the Rippaverse material that's already out there, like ISOM number 1 and 2, and Alpha Core number 1, and Yaira number 1, and the soon-to-be Gooding number 1. If you've read all that, then all of the auxiliary comic material that's in the Rippazine is going to be superfluous to you. And while the interviews are interesting and you might actually learn something from what the artists tell you in the book, the creatives who are spotlighted tell you in the book, uh, it's hard to say that the $7 price tag, even that, is going to be justifiable just to get at that information. I don't know. It might be. Your mileage may vary as far as that goes, but yeah, I'm not really terribly fond of the fact that I've got this book in my collection now, and that the one thing that I bought it for, which was the salvage story, did not turn out to be anything better than what we've seen from other Rippaverse properties. I would probably say at this point, the salvage story rates about a 4.5, same as Yaira number 1. And we'll see if the second issue of the Rippazine fixes that. But other than that, yeah, I just can't recommend it based on that. So Rippaverse is still largely batting 0, and I don't know that it's bound to improve anytime soon. I'm hoping so much that Gooding is going to be the first good Rippaverse comic. I had previous faith in the well, not previous faith. I had at least some little confidence that the Soska sisters would be able to perform until I realized, having read Yaira number 1, that there's no way that their past Marvel work was all theirs. You can go back and look at my last video on Yaira number 1 to understand what I mean there. But Mike Baron is a proven commodity. Same as Chuck Dixon is, by and large, but Chuck Dixon is kind of hit or miss. Mike Baron is also hit or miss, as far as I'm concerned. I appreciate him fondly for some of his issues of The Flash. That's what I know him for best. But there's also things that he's written that I have no real regard for. I've never understood his Badger character. Nexus is a character that I'd like to get into trying to understand again. The first time through, I was kind of like, I'm just not really sure what's going on in this book. And so I think I gave up. I think I gave up on it a little too quickly. Wasn't terribly fond of his Archer and Armstrong take after Barry Windsor Smith left the book, but sometimes it gets hard to follow in the footsteps of the creator of the property and still give a true account of the characters in the book, like Archer and Armstrong for Valiant. Although I do think that some of his Turok Dinosaur Hunter work for that company was pretty good. Yeah, I could go on about Mike Baron's career, but honestly, what I'd just like to be able to see is a Rippaverse book where I can open to the first page and not be disappointed right off the bat. If I can get that out of Gooding, that will be amazing. So, thank you for watching. I hope this has been informative and may have caused you to decide whether or not you are going to get the Rippazine yourself. There is a $7 copy of it. You don't have to pay the full $20 like I did. So if you do decide that you want to pick it up, then I would suggest conserve your money, get the cheap version. And other than that, I think I'm out. Thanks for watching. I may try and make this my first monetized video. Heaven help me. I don't know exactly how that's going to work. I did reach 1,000 subscribers, and so now I have access to ad revenue. And I'm going to see if maybe I can get some of this stuff, some of those sweet pennies flowing my way. Thanks again for watching. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe if you haven't already so that you can be notified of later videos. I think the next comic I'm going to be reviewing is actually one that is not a Rippaverse book. It's one that was submitted to me by Andrew Campbell, if I'm remembering correctly, and it is called King of Justice. This dude's a glutton for punishment if he wants to submit a comic book my way. So we'll see how he does. I actually already reviewed the web comic version of, or actually it was a video comic version of the book. This is going to be the digital version of the book, which should reflect also the paper copy. And it'll be interesting to see what if there's like a significant difference or a significant difference in feel for between watching a video comic and reading an actual, the digital comic versus, reading something on paper, etc., etc. So that will be coming out in the relatively near future. And beyond that, I think I will wrap it up here. Thanks to all. Thanks to my 1,000 subscribers. I can't believe we finally made it here, and hopefully this is just the beginning of the next climb up to the 2,000 mark. And I will talk to y'all later.